Well, good morning. Hopefully, hopefully everything finds you well this morning. Today, I just wanted to give another brief update about our current situation, and then we want to go ahead and move to the material on Latin American revolutions has been posted online for your viewing. So, first thing I wanted to talk about this morning is yesterday, the Senate passed a $2 trillion relief bill. That's the largest relief bill that has ever been passed in human history. As part of the package that was agreed upon. So what does that mean for $2 trillion to be passed by the U.S. Senate? Well, because representatives, they get to decide $100 checks. That's most American adults will receive a check for $1,200 and then $500 more for each child that they have. In addition to that $1,200 check per adult and $500 per child, we're looking at $500 billion for loans for struggling businesses, for cities and states, and another $130 billion for hospitals. And that's because if you haven't noticed or known that the hospitals like New York City, they're kind of overwhelmed. So, we'll see what happens. It's up to the House of Representatives now to vote on it. And actually, some members of the House of Representatives are disappointed with this. Some members of the House of Representatives feel that this is just money to evil corporations and that we shouldn't be focusing in on much as them as average everyday people. I think Bernie Sanders has called for every American to get $2,000 a month until the coronavirus is over. And so you can see there's different ways that people are approaching the corona crisis. And so we'll see what happens tomorrow. The House of Representatives gets to vote. Now, this particular bill actually that passed in the Senate passed 96-0. That's unanimous. The 4 people who did not vote were actually quarantined because of coronavirus. And so we'll see what happens with that. So the crisis continues to worsen in places like Spain. Actually, Italy is the number 1 place with deaths right now. It looks like 7,503 people in Italy have died in Italy from coronavirus. That represents actually 10% of all the people who got the disease have died from the disease. Spain is in second place with 4,000 deaths. They have about 7% of the people who have been infected have died. China's third, Iran fourth, France fifth, and the United States is in sixth place. We have about 1,000 people who've died of coronavirus so far. And that represents for us only 1.5% of the population. So when you look at how we're doing compared to Italy, Italy has 10% of the people who died, 10% of the people who've gotten the disease have died of the disease. Here in the United States, it's 1.5%. Now, the thing about that number, though, is people have suggested that, we might be a week or two behind Italy. And so some people have said that we have to wait to kind of see if we're going to see those numbers like we see in Italy or not. And so we'll see, and New York City definitely is where most of this is happening and struggling the most. So we'll continue to kind of gauge and watch those numbers as it goes on. Okay, so with that said, let's kind of now move away from current events to a handout you got called Chapter 18, Century Revolutions Part 2, Creole Revolutions in Latin America. Now, most of that handout is filled out. Now, there are going to be, if you take a look at it, there are going to be some areas that do have things to fill out. And so you're going to have to either type that in or later by hand or come back or whatever. So it's just something to consider. as we're doing it. We talked about last time, we kind of reviewed the material. We talked about the American Revolution, we talked about the French Revolution, and we talked about the Haitian Revolution. We kind of talked about some of the successes and some of the failures. And the American, all three were failures in some way, because all three were limited in the successes that we have compared to what we might look at today, what democracy should look like. For the American Revolution, the same rich, white, wealthy men that were in charge, that same group of people, rich, white, wealthy men, were in charge before the revolution. They were in charge after the revolution. The French Revolution started off with the ideas of equality, started off with the ideas of democracy, and it ended up with Napoleon. It ended up with, random mobs of people, executing people. The Haitian Revolution started off with a lot of promise, but sadly, because for many reasons, including the international community never supported Haiti, they fined Haiti for their independence. Those are all things that would give Haiti problems, in addition to the fact that they had corruption and no experience with democracy. So now we're going to look at South America. What about South America? In fact, you have a document I uploaded on Teams called Creole Revolutions and 18th Century Revolutions, Creole Revolutions in Latin America. And there's a map there on the screen, and that map is a really good indicator of how much South America changed from before these revolutions and after the revolutions. So before the revolutions, there was two countries that for the most part controlled all of South America, and that's going to be Spain. Obviously, they have controlled Peru and Colombia, and then there's Brazil. Now, there are some minor areas in the north where the British and the Dutch control, but for the most part, South America is controlled by the British, the Spanish and the Portuguese. But now, independence is not something that is going to be lost on the people here as well. In fact, the people here, they want all the same things. They want to experience the independence that they are seeing in the Americas, in the United States. They want to experience the ideas of the French Revolution without like the random killing and executing and stuff like that. So the first one on our handout says, in Latin America, there's a group of people that we should know by name, and a group of people we've talked about before, and is the Creoles. The Creoles are a group of people who were supported, and they advanced these revolutionary ideas. And so there was a document that was uploaded on Teams. This document that I'm making reference to, there was two documents. If you go to Teams, if you go to the very top, there is a tab for and the one that we're looking at is called 18th Century Revolutions Part 2. I think it even says student at the end. And so most of it is filled out, but not all of it is filled out. So the group of people that we're talking about right now are the Creoles. And we've actually talked about these people before. There's a lot of different types of people in the Americas, but these Creoles, these people are white people in America. And these white people who are born in America were generally wealthy. They were generally well-educated and very familiar with Enlightenment thinking. And that's like the one thread that we've seen all throughout this time, is that Enlightenment thinking is what is inspiring these revolutions, that it's as much as it is bullets and bravery, books also help make independence happen. As much as bullets and bravery help independence happen, books do too. It's intellectuals. It's people who write. It's people who read. It's people who are interested in philosophy that make independence possible. And this group of people that we're talking about, these Creoles, these are people whose parents were born in Spain. Their parents were born in in Portugal, but they were born in South America. They were born in Mexico. These are the Creoles. They're generally well educated, they're pretty wealthy, and they're familiar with elements of Enlightenment thinking. Well, that's great that they know a little bit about John Locke and they know a little bit about independence, all that kind of stuff. That's great. However, there's a problem though, because even though they're in this tension, you know, just like Jefferson said he wrote down all men are created equal. He's inspired by Enlightenment thinking, but Jefferson, he owned slaves. We have this Declaration of Independence that says that it's wrong for you to rule over people without giving them rights, God-given rights, you know, made in the image of God. But at the same time, our country embraces and protects slavery. There's a problem here also in South America with these Creoles, because it says on your handout that they consider themselves superior to a whole list of people. They consider themselves superior to the Native Americans. You know, even though 80% of them or so had died because of disease like smallpox, there were still pockets of Native Americans. And these pockets of Native Americans were still discriminated against. They're still treated poorly. They were still given low jobs and treated like virtual slaves, even if technically they would not be allowed to. And so we have them feeling superior to Native Americans. We also see them being superior to mestizos. And we've talked about mestizos a lot before. Mestizos are these mixed race people. Mestizos represent the majority of Latin America. These are people that are a mixture of Native Americans who were there originally. And when the Spanish first came over, they had these relationships and they produce a mixed race people, these mestizos. And so the Creoles, they're white, they're pure white. And they feel they are superior than the mestizo majority as well. Well, there's another group of people that we should look at. And these are people who are white, but they were not born in the Americas. And we talk about the Americas, we're talking about, you know, I'm talking about all of the Americas, not just like the United States. So the Americas refers to also like Latin America. And there was two types of white people in Latin America. There's people who were born in Latin America. These are the Creoles. They're born here. They're born in Mexico. They're born in Peru. They're born in Argentina, whatever the case may be. These are Creoles, born in America. Their parents born in Spain. But then there are white people who are living and they are working in South America, and they weren't born in South America. There's people living and working in Mexico. They're white, and they weren't born in Mexico. They were born in Spain. And because they were white people who were born in Spain or born in Portugal, born on the Iberian Peninsula, they thought they were superior to the white people born in Latin America. And this is kind of how we as humans are. We're always looking for reasons or excuses to consider ourselves better or superior to other groups of people. It says on the handout, this group of people are called the Peninsulares. These are people who were born on the Iberian Peninsula. And because they were born back in Europe, back in Spain, back in Portugal, these Peninsulares, they thought that they were better. It says that they were whites born in Spain or Portugal. They moved to the New World and they thought they were superior to everyone else, including the Creoles, who did not have the privilege of being born in the Old World. And so we have two types of white people in the Americas. We have these white people born in America, the Creoles. We have white people born in Spain, and those whites born in Spain think they are superior to everyone. So if we have this social hierarchy, a social pyramid, on the very top we have these Peninsulares. We have these people who are the whites born in Spain, born in Portugal. And then we have below them the Creoles. They're white people born in Mexico, born in Peru, born in South America. And then after that, we have mixed race people, the mestizos. And those mixed race people are the majority. The average person in Latin America are these mixed race people. And then we have Native Americans, and then we have mulattoes, which are this mixture of black and white, and then we have African slaves. So we have all these different groups of people. So the very bottom, it says on the handout, mulattoes and slaves were at the bottom of society because these people are, considered the most different, the most other. We've talked a lot about these issues of African otherness. People would say that they are very different. And so they're going to be the very bottom of society. So it says then on the handout that colonists in the Americas had various reasons to have discontent regarding Spanish colonial rule. Okay, so why do white people in the Americas, in Spanish America, want to rebel? Well, we have 3 reasons that we're going to look at. So there's 3 reasons why they're going to be considering independence. 3 reasons why they're going to think that this is going to be a good time and a good move for them to make. And so the first reason on your handout, it says that many Creoles were part of a rising middle class. And we've talked about the role of the middle class. In fact, when we looked at our video last time about the French Revolution, you might remember there's a growing middle class, a new group of people called the bourgeoisie. And those bourgeoisie were people who were not necessarily born wealthy, but they were people that became wealthy through hard work, through their investment in their businesses. That was the bourgeoisie, that was the middle class. And we have the same group of people here in Latin America. It says that this was a rising middle class who were wealthy owners of estates, of mines, businesses. And it says that they actually opposed challenges to the free market that we see in capitalism. Again, we talked about this last time, that capitalism is part of why the American Revolution happened. You have all these independent business leaders, and they like the free market. The free market says that if I can create a business and I can sell a gourmet hamburger for $12 and you're willing to pay for it because you think the quality is great, I can do that. It's a free market. I can sell to you. If instead in the free market, I want to decide not to make the most expensive, high quality burger, but I want something that is relatively cheap, something that is quick, something that is affordable, and I want to sell a $1.50 burger and they're something that people want, I can do that in the free market. I can sell to whatever I want within reason to whoever I want within reason. That's the free market. And it says that these Creoles, they did not like challenges to the free market system, which was represented by the Spanish practice, look at that word, of mercantilism. Mercantilism is something we've also talked about already. You might remember mercantilism was this idea, an economic idea that said that the only reason that colonies existed, they existed just to make their mother country money. That means that Spain or Portugal or the Netherlands or the British, they invested in these colonies and they just wanted raw materials from these colonies. They just wanted raw goods from these colonies, and they were going to take those raw goods, manufacture them into processed finished products, and sell them back to the Americas at a cost. And they also told the Americas, they told the Spanish colonies, they told the Portuguese colonies, you are not allowed to buy from anyone else, even if someone has a cheaper price for you. So that's one of the things that you should think about, was that they were opposed to mercantilism. It says on your handout that mercantilism required products only to be sold to Spain. That mercantilism required products only be sold to Spain. And that's a problem, because what if I could get a better deal selling to someone else? That's a problem, because what if I could make more money selling it to more customers? Mercantilism limited what people were able to do, and they didn't want that. If the free market capitalism says you should be able to sell within reason whatever you want to within reason whoever you want. That's what capitalism says. That's what the free market says, that I can reason whatever I want. So that's one reason they didn't like it. They did not like the challenges to the market, the free market system of capitalism. They did not like mercantilism. Number 2, it says on the handout that Creoles wanted more political power to match their growth in wealth. Most government jobs, it says, were given to Spaniards who were born in Spain. Most government jobs were given to Spaniards who were born in Spain. And so again, this is another problem. I live in Mexico. I live in South America. I live in Peru. I am part of this new wealthy middle class as a Creole. I am part of the group that's making the jobs. I'm part of the group we are hiring. That's who I am. That's who I represent. I think I should probably be in the running for some of these jobs. I think I should be in the running for some of these government positions. But in fact, that's not what we see. What we see is that these Spaniards born in Spain are getting those jobs. These Spaniards born in Spain are the ones ruling Mexico and ruling Peru and ruling different parts of South America. And this is going to be a huge problem. That's going to be a huge problem. It says that these government jobs were given to Spaniards born in Spain. And that's the second reason why these Creoles are looking for revolution to solve their problems. There's a third reason. It says that mestizos were part of the majority, and they wanted a greater share of political power and economic wealth. And so mestizos are also interested in revolution as well. It's not just the middle class. It's not just the Creoles who want that, but mestizos, they want that as well. They want a greater share of political power and economic wealth. They're doing a lot of the work, and they want to participate in the wealth that has been produced. So now the section of your handout, we talk about a particular person. There's a guy you should know by name. His name is Simón Bolivar. And we have a country named after Bolivar. It's Bolivia, right? And Simón Bolivar is super duper important. You should know this guy by name. He's the one that remakes the map of South America to look the way it does. It says on your handout that the middle class Creoles, they wanted independence from Spain because they knew that with independence, they could kick out that ruling class of white people. Remember, and there's this social pyramid. On the very top are white people born in Spain. If I'm a white person born in South America, I know that independence means that I've kicked out that other group of white people, and I alone am left to rule now in South America. It says on your, they knew that they would be able to be in charge in Latin America, and they'd be able to rule over the other ethnic groups. That if I could get those whites born in Spain out of South America, they knew that they would be able to rule over other ethnic groups. They would be then superior over the mestizos. They'd be superior over the Native Americans. They'd be superior over the mulattoes and the African slaves. So that's the goal and the thinking of the Creoles. If we kick out the whites who are born in Spain, that now the Creoles would be superior. It says on your handout that the Creoles, they wanted independence, but they did not want the help of these other racial groups. They wanted independence, but they did not want to go over, they did not want the support of the other ethnic groups. One of the things that we see is that because they do fight for independence, one of the things that we see is that because they are fighting for independence, you would think they would want the majority to help them. You would think that they would want Native Americans that would be able to fight. You think that they want mestizos to want to fight, but they don't want those people at all because they don't want a repeat of things they saw in other places. For example, the next line, it says, the example of Haiti. This example of Haiti, it actually frightened the Creoles. It frightened them because guess what happened in Haiti? You know who walked away with power in Haiti? Not the white people who lived there. There were white people who lived in Haiti who were slave owners. Those people at the end of the day didn't walk away with power. It was African slaves who got their freedom. And that is like the nightmare scenario for these Creoles in South America. They don't want to, at first, ask these African slaves to participate in the independence movement because if they do, what happens if we get rid of slavery? And what happens if these non-white majority people take over? They did not want that. The example of Haiti, it frightened them. And below that, they also, it says, And in addition to the example of Haiti, it frightened them. They did not at first want to end slavery. At first, they didn't want to end slavery. And this is actually kind of the same thing in the United States, because in our American Revolution, the British told American slaves, if you join our army, if you fight against the American Revolution, we, the British, will give you your freedom. And so it's kind of ironic that we say, oh, all men are created equal, all these sorts of things, and the British are evil. But in our American Revolution, the British told American slaves, hey, if you are willing to take up a gun, if you're willing to fight with us, the British, we will give you the freedom that the American Revolution won't. And so we kind of see this kind of complex, weird relationship. The next line, it says they did not want to end slavery and racial hierarchies. Nothing to really add there, but they wanted to keep the pyramid of power the same. They just wanted to get rid of one element of the pyramid of power. And the third line, it says that they saw the example of the French Revolution and they did not want a reign of terror. They did not want a reign of terror. You know, the thing is that they looked at what happened with Haiti and they thought, well, we don't want that to happen. I mean, we don't want the African slaves to get independence and for us to be like out of power. But they also didn't want what happened in France. In France, it went from like democracy to mobocracy, where it was like the mobs making decisions, where it was like the mobs executing and rounding up people who are not revolutionary enough. So those were the things that they did not want. They did not want Haiti's example of slavery going away. They did not want France's example, which actually led to a reign of terror. They did not want a reign of terror. They didn't want those things. And so it says on the handout that because of their not wanting those things, they want to exclude these racial groups that were not white. And it says one of the most important leader of the movement was this Simon Bolivar. He's this George Washington-like figure. He is on the money of many South American countries. He's this hugely influential leader, Simon Bolivar. And he was, it says on your handout, rebel general and a political leader. He's a rebel general and a political leader. That's who Simon Bolivar is. He does these two things. That's how he's like George Washington. George Washington was our rebel general, and then he became our first president. And that's the similar role that Simon Bolivar plays. So let's talk a little bit more about Simon Bolivar and find out a little bit about him. It says on your handout that he was inspired by something, and hopefully you would be able to think about what kind of thinking is going to inspire Simon Bolivar. We're going to write down Enlightenment thinking. Again, it's the Enlightenment that's going to inspire, that's going to support, that's going to give him the background to think about why it's okay to revolt. Because the Enlightenment changes everything. The Enlightenment says that there's a social contract that I have between me and the government that's in charge of me. And as soon as the government breaks their end of the social contract, I can break my end. This was very different because before the Enlightenment, there was something called the divine right of kings. And it says that a king is the king because God wants him to be in charge. And that's not up for me to question. It's not up for me to overthrow. It's actually only really up to God. And the Enlightenment says, no, that's not true at all. The Enlightenment said that, yes, God may have allowed a king to be in charge, but I only have to be loyal to that king as long as he's doing his job as the king. That's the thing about social contract. You break your end, I'll break my end. So that's what Simon Bolivar is inspired by. And it says on the handout that his ideas were outlined in a document called the Jamaica Letter. So there's a couple of documents that we've talked about so far. You know, we've talked a little bit about the Declaration of Independence. You know, that Jefferson writes that all men are created equal, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. He gets that from John Locke. We also talked about the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is a document in French revolutionary thinking. And now there's this Jamaica Letter. And one of the things about the Jamaica Letter, here's a quotation from the Jamaica Letter. It says that it argued that people will strive to recover the rights to which their creator and nature have entitled them. That their creator and nature have entitled them. And that's the thing about this Jamaica Letter that is like a perfect example of Enlightenment thinking. This Jamaica Letter says that all of us are born with rights that are given to us by our creator, like our God, and by nature itself. The Enlightenment says that all of us are born with God-given rights, and that no one can take away these God-given rights. And that's the same thing Jefferson says. Jefferson says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Now, even though the Enlightenment does a lot to like question traditional religion, the Enlightenment in these examples assumes that there has to be a God, that there has to be a God that made you and made me with certain rights and certain valuable, elements, that it is just natural that we have these rights. So this is what the Jamaica Letter assumes, that we have been given these rights by our creator and nature. In fact, it says on your handout in that quotation that we have been entitled to these things, that it's just what I am entitled to. So it says on the handout that Bolivar was able to free much of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, and briefly, these countries together are known as Gran Colombia. And it says on the handout that he hoped that this Gran Colombia would be kind of like a United States of South America, but it says on your handout, it would not last long due to regional differences. It wouldn't last long due to regional differences. That even though he hoped that just like there was a United States in the North, he hoped that he could put together in this newly independent South America, a United States of South America. But the problem was that there was regional differences between Venezuelans, between Colombians, between people in Peru, and this idea of a United States of South America would never last. It would never last. And that's the problem. Regionalism, in other words, pride in your region, is going to be something that's going to break up this idea of a United States of South America, of Gran Colombia. And we should also be familiar that we also in the United States have a problem of regionalism. Our problem of regionalism is going to be the North, the South. And this pride of regionalism, of the idea that the South's economy and the South's values and the South's way of life are so different from the North, it's going to lead the South to feel that the only way to solve their problem is by seceding from the Union. And so we'll see regionalism is a part of our story as well. For South America, causes an end to Gran Colombia, to the United States of South America. It would not last long. It says on the handout that if you look at this newly independent South America, how do they do? For us, how did we do? Well, we went from the Articles of Confederation, which was like a disaster. It was terrible. And then we went to the Constitution, which is better. But remember, our own Constitution has problems. We say 50% of the population, women cannot vote. We say that millions of Americans who are Black, who serve as slaves, they can't vote. So there are problems with our American Constitution as well. We don't have it perfect at the beginning, and we're still working these things out to this day right now. But what about Venezuela and Chile? Look at the handout. It says from 1811 to 1833, we'll write down that they had 9 different constitutions. They had 9 different constitutions. I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, we go from the Articles to the Constitution, and then yes, we add and we correct as we go. But in this short period of time, from 1811 to 1833, they go through 9 different constitutions. That's incredible. And that kind of rapid change, that kind of roller coaster of politics is not going to do well for them. Just like in France. I mean, France, we have like the Estates General, to the National Assembly, to the Committee for Public Safety, to Napoleon. I mean, it's like this roller coaster ride. And whenever there's no stability, that doesn't really do well for a country. It says on the handout that Latin America had no experience with democracy like, you'll write down, British colonies. They had no experience with democracy like British colonies. The British colonies, you might remember, if you were a British colony, you inherited things like the Magna Carta. If you were a British colony, you inherited things like the English Bill of Rights. If you were a British colony, you were allowed to do like voting locally. Remember, there's something that you learned in 8th grade called the House of Burgesses. So American colonies had a lot of experience. The United States, before they were independent, had experience with democracy. They had practice for hundreds of years. They could go back to a document from the 1200s, the Magna Carta, like 500 years before independence, and see examples of democracy in action. The Spanish colonies, they didn't have that. The Spanish colonies were learning this as they went with very little practice beforehand. And so they had no experience with democracy like the British colonies. And another practical problem, it says, in colonial times, the Catholic Church officially dominated, we'll write down, the education system. They officially dominated the education system and were active in politics. So the Catholic Church were the ones that ran all the schools. If you were educated in the Americas, in a university, you were educated in a university run by the Catholic Church. If you were educated formally in the Americas, it's because you were taught by some Catholic priest, by some Jesuit, or some other Catholic oriented official. And so that means the Catholic Church has a tremendous amount of power and influence in education in South America. And the Catholic Church had no problem getting actively involved in politics. Now, we also have religious people actively involved in politics in the United States, 1700s, and even today. But there's a degree to which they were active, which was even more direct. Because in our own Constitution, in our own political thinking, we have this idea of separation of powers, of not just separation of powers, but separation of church and state. Because in the Americas, there was not one church that was like popular in the Americas. There were people who were Episcopalian, people who were Presbyterian, people who were Lutheran, people who were Baptist. There was something called Congregationalists. There was Puritans. There was Pilgrims. In the United States, because there were so many different types of Christians, none of them had like the official status in the Americas, in the United States, rather. So we have this separation of church and state that doesn't allow for what happens in Latin America, where the Catholic Church is the official voice of Christianity in South America. It says in colonial times, the Catholic Church officially dominated education and was active in politics. It says on the handout below that revolutionary armies were often led by generals who were so popular that these armies came to be more loyal to the general than the government. And that's a problem. It's a problem when you're fighting for independence, that's great. You're good at your job, that's great. But what happens when people realize, you know what, this government is kind of new and who knows if it's going to last? The general that I follow, he's good and he's solid. He's always going to be there for me. People became more loyal to the general they served than the government that they supposedly represented. It says that these popular generals, known as caudillos, became strong, independent local leaders. Strong, independent local leaders. These local generals, they became independent local leaders, and they kind of did whatever they wanted. And they did whatever they wanted because they were so popular, they were so good at what they did that the local people said, well, I'm going to go for this guy, even if he does stuff that's kind of shady, or even if this guy does stuff that's, illegal. I'm going to go with the guy who's actually putting food on my table. It says that these leaders, that they ignored the laws passed by these newly independent governments that they didn't like or what they didn't agree with. And the thing about these generals is that they were so popular that if there was a law that was passed that they did not like, if there was a law that was passed that they didn't agree with, they would just simply choose to ignore it. And they knew that they were so popular with people that they could just do that. They knew that they were so popular that even if what they were doing was against the law of this newly independent nation, what are people going to do? Like really, what are people going to do? I'm going to go with the guy that is kind of violating the law. I'm going to go with the guy that is kind of not following how things should be because he's going to take care of me at the end of the day. It says on the handout that their popularity with common people made them known as what's called a personalist leader. These people's personalities were so winning. These people's personalities were just so charismatic that they were so popular with these common people because it says that they were perceived to be aware of and identify with the struggles of regular everyday people. People may have looked at these generals and say, okay, well, we're free now from Spain. That's good. And I know that we have like an elected government. That's good. But you know what? Is it a big deal that this general doesn't follow all the rules and laws? The capital is hundreds of miles away, but this general is right here. He understands me. He knows what I've been through. He knows what I've gone through. I know that he's not technically following everything, but I want to go ahead and support him. I want to support him. So it says that they were popular with common people. They became known as personalist leaders as a result of that. That they felt, common people felt that these men identified with and understood their struggles. And this is like a theme that we see of dictatorships all around the world. Dictatorships all around the world, they often have a guy who says, I'm one of you, I'm a regular person. We had some guests from Uganda some time ago, and there's a dictator from Uganda, a guy named Idi Amin. And Idi Amin, I think, had like a first grade education or something like that. He was a military general. He was super popular. And one of the reasons why people liked him was that he could identify with them. People said, he said, I'm just like you. I'm not like these elites. I'm not like these rich people. I'm an average, everyday, ordinary person. And we even see that in politics today. In politics today, pretty much every single person who runs for president of the United States of America, almost every person, when they have like rallies or whatever, one of the things they're going to do is when they're like talking at a manufacturing plant, they're going to like unbutton their top button. They're going to loosen their tie. They're going to roll up their sleeves. Beto O'Rourke was really good at this, just kind of like seeming like an everyday, ordinary person. That's what like good politicians want to do. They just want to be relatable. I don't wear a tie. I roll up my sleeves. I'm an ordinary guy. Now, Trump doesn't really do that well at all, but there is another element that Trump does come off like that. He famously eats like McDonald's and likes ketchup with his steak, stuff that is not like considered high class or whatever. But it was enough that some people in Ohio and Pennsylvania, people who worked in manufacturing, like blue class working class people said, you know what, Trump's there for me. And even if he says stuff kind of shady or stuff that's not so good on Twitter, he understands me and understands my struggle. I'm willing to give him a pass on some of these things because he understands the struggle of me as a working class person. So we even see that today in politics. This allowed them to ignore laws they did not like or agree with. It says on the handout below that there are now some results that we want to talk about, these Creole revolutions. So a couple of the results, it says on the handout that these new constitutions would legally end social distinctions. In other words, this pyramid of power that put white people on top and all these, different hierarchies of race, those would be legally ended. They would abolish slavery, which was good, but discrimination was still widespread. And just like our own country as well, even with the Declaration of Independence, even with the Constitution, even after like the 13th Amendment gets rid of slavery, even with the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment, these things don't magically change America. It doesn't make discrimination stop being a thing. You know, there still is racism today. There's still discrimination today. There's still sexism today. So all those things continue to happen, even though these new constitutions would legally end social distinctions, abolishing slavery, but discrimination was still widespread. Now, below that, it says that these new governments were often conservative. And in this context, conservative means that they valued and stressed ideas of Spanish culture and Roman Catholic religion. So in this context, in South American, Latin American, 19th century context, conservative means that they valued and they stressed Spanish culture and Roman Catholic religion. Because in general, we have these two phrases that we hear about. We have like conservatives and we have liberals. So conservatives often want to kind of keep things the way that they've always been. Conservatives in general don't want to like radically transform society. Conservatives see that radically transforming society can be dangerous. Conservatives would point to the French Revolution and say, yeah, that's what happens when you radically transform society. You have things that have always been accepted as true changed. And that could be disastrous. We have kings being killed. We have Christ being rejected. We have calendars and clocks being changed. Conservatives would look at the French Revolution and say, once you open up this Pandora's box of change, where does it end? Where does it stop? Conservatives would say, you need to be really careful. On the other end, we have liberals, and liberals would say that you have to have change to have progress. Liberals would say you have to have change to make things better. I mean, that's the nature of progress. I mean, what if we locked your math instruction at third grade level or fifth grade level? And I said, well, I just don't really want to change. Algebra is hard. Geometry doesn't make sense. We should probably just keep it right here. Well, without moving forward in sometimes uncomfortable ways, you don't make progress. So we have these two different levels. We have liberals and we have conservatives. And in Latin America, the new independent governments, they're conservative. They think that, you know what, we are free, but we don't want to free ourselves of the Catholic Church. It's such an important part of our cultural background. And actually today, most Mexican Americans, even in the United States, if they're religious, they're typically Catholic. All throughout Latin America, most people, if they are religious, they are probably Catholic. And the second element that they say is, well, not only should we embrace the Catholic faith, but we should also think about Spain and really honor Spanish culture. And that's the same thing today as well to think about. One of the things to think about today is that sometimes Hispanics that don't speak Spanish are considered like less Mexican or less Hispanic. But again, if you think about that, that's a very conservative idea. It says that to be truly Hispanic or to be truly Latino, you have to speak Spanish. That's not even a language native to South America. Spanish isn't even a language native to Mexico. It's the language of the conquerors who came. It says on the handout that in Peru, voting would be only allowed for those who could speak and who could read Spanish, who could speak and who could read Spanish. And so Peru said, listen, Spanish culture is so important that you can't even vote unless you can show us that you can speak the Spanish language, you can read and write in the Spanish language, because they want to so much push Spanish culture. Though they kicked out Spain politically, they want to adopt it culturally. And you might think, well, what's the big deal with that? I mean, everyone in South America, everyone in Mexico speaks Spanish, right? Well, no, they don't. In fact, it says on the next line that this kept indigenous people from voting. That word indigenous, it means native people. Because even though you think Spanish in South America today, Spanish in Mexico today, there are millions of in South America and Latin America who either speak a Native American language to this day in 2020, or there are even some people in South America, some people in Mexico who don't speak Spanish today in 2020. It says that these types of laws, these conservative laws, kept indigenous people from voting all the way till 1860. That if you didn't speak Spanish, you weren't able to vote. And that was by design, because a lot of these rich, elite white people in charge of Latin American countries, they didn't want Native Americans to have a vote, a say, or a voice in politics. In fact, look at some of these numbers about the groups who don't speak Spanish to this day. It says on your handout that in Mexico, 6% of the population of Mexico, or 6 million people today, still speak indigenous languages. That's today. That's in 2020. We have 6 million people in Mexico that still speak Native American languages, these indigenous languages. I mean, that's an incredible number. And so if you were to meet some of these people in Mexico, their ancestors have lived there for hundreds of years. Any Spaniard ever showed up and they're still speaking those Native American languages, and you would say, well, you're not really Mexicans because you don't speak Spanish. They're the most authentically Mexican because their family has been in Mexico before any Spaniard ever came into the gene pool. It says on the handout, look at other countries. In Peru, you'll write down that 35% of the people of Peru speak indigenous languages. 35%. I mean, just think about that in your own social circle. How many Hispanics do you know are trilingual? In other words, how many Hispanics do you know speak English, speak Spanish, and then they have a Native American language they speak? Probably, I would guess, probably no one you know, unless you have like Peruvian friends or Guatemalan friends are in that category. In Peru, 35% of Peruvians speak not just Spanish, but an indigenous language as well, as do, take a look at your handout, 42% of Guatemalans. 42% of Guatemalans. So, I mean, these are huge numbers, and these are the types of people that the Spanish government wants to keep out of power. There are so many different languages. In Mexico today, I also read that there are actually 63 Native American languages spoken today in Mexico. That's a lot. It says on your handout that these darker-skinned indigenous people would routinely discriminated against by the white, wealthy upper class. That they'd be routinely discriminated against by the white, wealthy upper class. So that's just something, I mean, just this sad pattern that we still see, that we sometimes, partly because much of the Hispanic community that we interact with in Texas is Mexican American, we assume that Latin American or Hispanic, brown-skinned people who are mestizos, but that's not the case. In many countries, like Argentina is a good example. Argentina is a white majority country. And in other countries like Mexico, the ruling class often are the people who are not dark brown-skinned natives. They're simply not. In fact, those are the people that are routinely, sadly, discriminated against by white, wealthy upper class. So another thing that we see is that the white people in charge of Latin America before the revolution are the white time. It says as the wealthy, it was rich white people ruling and in charge of America before the revolution and after, mainly heirs, white and many rich white millionaires. Finally, last but not least, women. Women are such in all of these revolutions. In the American Revolution, we have, like Thomas Paine's common sense. A lot of these ideas are supported by women who are intellectuals. They're reading Thomas Paine. If you ever watched the musical Hamilton or listen to the soundtrack of Hamilton, one of the songs talks about women reading Thomas Paine and being inspired and wanting to take the next steps forward to include women as well. In France, women hosted salons where they were wealthy women who had huge houses and, well, let's have these parties and we'll have discussions and debates about Enlightenment thinking. Women, angry women, stormed the palace at Versailles, forcing the king and queen to come back to Paris. And women also in the Haitian Revolution actually pick up rifles and participate in the fighting. Women also have an important role in Latin America as well. They spread these Enlightenment thinking. There are some cases where they also fight. But women in Latin America, it says on the handout, could not vote after independence. They could not vote after independence, and they received little formal education. They couldn't vote, and they received very little formal education. So a lot of things just don't line up for women. You know, they were not allowed to be a part of the ruling class before, and they were not allowed to be part of the ruling class after. And these are changes that they don't easily reconcile. And they are things that we are going to kind of talk about more as we see the revolutionary progress to rights for women and rights for Native people. And with that, that brings us to an end of our time. I look forward to seeing you guys again tomorrow as we take a few more steps looking at the role of revolution